So next on our agenda, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Robert Desrosiers. Dr. Desrosiers is a graduate from the Veterinary College of the University of Montreal in 1979 and has been working exclusively with swine since then. From graduation until 1995, he has occupied various roles among the swine medicine and production as he worked for an integration company in Canada. In 1996, he spent 1 year as a visiting instructor at North Carolina State University. He then joined Boehringer Ingelheim, Canada, where he worked as a technical services veterinarian until 2020. Dr. Desrosiers currently works as a swine veterinary consultant. Dr. Desrosiers is a diplomat of the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, certified in swine health and management since 1997, and has authorized articles in peer-reviewed publications, as well as lay magazines for the last 40 years. It is with great pleasure and honor that we welcome Dr. Desrosiers here today to discuss one of our greatest challenges as swine vets and producers, PRRS virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, for this introduction, and thanks to the Southwest Ontario Vet Group for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I was asked to talk about growing pig vaccination for PRRS, but I have decided to cheat a little bit, and I will say a few words about preventing outbreaks in sows, sow vaccination, but I will spend most of my time on growing pig vaccination. So preventing outbreaks in sows, how do we do that? It's quite amazing that this disease, which has been the most significant for the last 20 to 30 years, at least here in North America and mainly in the old world, we don't have a good quantification of the causes for contamination. We know what they are, but we don't know what percentage of cases are associated with this cause or with that cause. There's almost nothing in the literature. So yeah, in 2007, I organized a survey in Quebec among swine practitioners, and I basically asked them, if you had 100 cases of PRRS breaks and sow herds, what percentage of these cases will be associated with a list of causes? And so they gave me their percentages. I did the same thing in 2019, basically the same questions. And it's interesting because I got almost exactly the same results. So I will just detail the results that I got in 2019. So that you know, the practitioners that took care in that survey were experienced practitioners. The average graduation was 29.9 years. So they had been working 30 years with swine. These practitioners had a direct or an indirect relation with about 85% of the total Quebec production. And the survey was confidential. People could not know what the other guys had answered. So this is what it did. I think the middle is the pointer. Yeah, okay. So aerosol came first. 51.5% of the breaks were thought to be associated with aerosol, which means that air, contaminated air going from one barn to the other one. Contaminated fomites, which means contaminated boots, clothes, equipment, material, 21.7%. Infected animals, 12.4%. So basically these are gilts that were infected, but people did not know that they were infected when they were introduced. And then contaminated animal vehicles. So if you take these four, this is 94% of the cases. So if you can control these four sources of contamination, basically you remove 94% of the cases if the practitioners are right, So, yeah, as far as aerosol is concerned, the debate over aerosol transmission of swine pathogens has been taking place for a long time. In fact, almost a quarter of a century ago, I wrote a paper in a newsletter called International Pig Litter, which was quite popular at the time among swine veterinarians. And in there, I discussed the transmission means of the PRRS virus. And one of the conclusions was that there is more and more epidemiological evidence suggesting that the virus could be transmitted between farms by aerosol. So a very credible scientist replied to, let's say, one of my conclusions, and in the same newsletter. So he said, I realize I am crazy, but I am going to attempt to argue against this excellent piece, and state that I believe the hypothesis of indirect transmission by aerosol is a myth and does not exist. So that's 25 years ago. Remember that. So for the years afterwards, we had this debate going on. You know, I would say, here's why I think that aerosol transmission is occurring, and you would say, here's why I think it's not occurring. However, 14 years later, the same scientist wrote a paper where he said, overall, air filtration led to an approximately 80% reduction in risk of introduction of novel PRRS virus, indicating that on large sow farms with good biosecurity in swine-dense regions, approximately 4/5 of the PRRS virus outbreaks may be attributable to aerosol transmission. So this is a complete change of opinion, but you know, only fools don't change their mind. So I'll give you a few personal opinions right now. I personally think that aerosol transmission of this virus is frequent and can occur over significant distances. And we can discuss later what significant means. And the other thing is that there are two things that I know work for PRRS. You have location and you have air filtration. And we'll talk a little bit about both. So location. At the American Association of Swine Veterinarians meeting last year, 4 different presentations were given that were discussing PRRS. And all of these presentations mention how important location is. So the first one, Dr. Lenker, they looked at herds in Pennsylvania. They had 93 sow herds that they looked at for a period of 10 years. 58 of these herds remained negative, 35 became positive. So they looked at the areas, and what they realized is that there were areas where it was way more likely to become infected with PRRS than others. Like, for example, this one here is about 15 times less likely to be affected by PRRS than this other area. Another presentation by Dr. Corzo, he said proximity plays a role most of the time. It plays a role most of the time. It doesn't mean that if you're close to an infected barn, you will automatically become infected, but your risk is much increased. Dr. Schwartz said, it has become readily apparent that even with the use of additional biosecurity measures, such as filtration, and we'll talk about filtration in a minute, sow farms located in high peak dense regions continue to become infected with PRRS at an elevated rate compared to farms located in areas with lesser peak density. And finally, Dr. Yeski, one of the best biosecurity measures, locates sow herds in less peak dense areas. So the first thing that people normally tell me when I talk about that is, I cannot move my barn. And I agree with that, I understand that. So if you cannot move your barn, what can you do? At least you can optimize your biosecurity, because even if aerosol is a frequent cause of transmission, there are many other causes on which you do have an impact. So you need to optimize your biosecurity. You can also try to increase the distance that you have to infected pigs. So the way to do that is to try to work with other producers so that infected pigs are placed as far as possible from your sow herds. The idea is to protect the sow herds. You know, if you put positive pigs close to a negative sow herd, you're not going to have that sow herd. So people should work as a group. Air filtration, for sure, that's something that can help, and we'll talk about that. There are other strategies that will probably become available in the future that are likely to be less expensive than air filtration. And one of them is electrostatic precipitators, which is something you put electrodes, let's say within a building, and these, let's say this system makes the dust, makes the, let's say the viruses that might be in the air settle. So if it's settled, then it's not removed, evacuated by the fans so that it can infect other barns in the area. Okay, air filtration. Earlier this year, me and Vincent Cousin, a guy from France, we published a paper where we looked at the results that had been obtained so far with incomplete air filtration and complete air filtration. So incomplete air filtration, basically what is available on the market, whether it's here or in the US, it's air filtration system that will block 75 to 95%, let's say, of viral particles, to make it simple. So 75 to 95% of viral particles could be blocked by this type of filter. So we summarized 11 studies that had been published in the last 10 years. And on average, the reduction in the number of breaks was 4 times. So if you have 100 breaks with a non-filtered farm, you would have 25 with a filtered barn. The results are even better if you have complete air filtration. Complete air filtration is a system where you use what we call HEPA filters. And the HEPA filters are blocking 99.97% of particles. So that's virtually complete filtration. So in our, let's say, study, we summarized the results that have been obtained with 65 farms. This is not working all the time. So 65 farms, and we looked at the results that have been obtained in the last 9 years with these farms. Only one of the 65 farms broke with PRRS during these 9 years, and the same farm broke twice. So something was going on. So the practitioner, Dr. Darwin Reichs in the US, went to look at the system, and what he realized was that there was one part of the system that was kind of broken. It was homemade, and it allowed unfiltered air to get into the barn. So if I remove that particular barn, we have a perfect record. 64 farms, the last 9 years, 0 breaks. So I'll give you let's say, a result of a real-life situation. So this is Pete Thomas at Iowa Select Farms. This is a company that has 250,000 sows. So the farms are located mainly in Iowa, very high pig density. And they had, before filtration, they had an 86% break rate, which means that if you have 100 sow herd, every year, 86 of them will break with PRRS. So they did install an air filtration system. In their case, they used a positive pressure ventilation air filtration system, and they used what we call MERV 15 filters, which block 85% of viral particles, if you want. Their break rate dropped to 18%. So this is 4.8 times less than what they had before. Okay, this is a system of a complete air filtration system, if you want, that I visited in France many years ago. So what's happening here is that this is inside that the filters are located. You have big fans that are pushing the air inside the building through these HEPA filters, and then the air gets out of the barns by chimney. So if you open the door, this type of system, the air gets out, it doesn't get in. So I was impressed by this farm because it's totally surrounded by pig barns. So this is the filtered farms here, and this is the neighboring farm. The neighboring farm is positive to PRRS and positive to mycoplasma, and this is my filtered farm, the blue triangle here. All of that, all of these spots, these letters there, these are pig barns, you know. So it's surrounded by pig barns that are infected with PRRS and mycoplasma. It has remained negative for 30 years. So this works. Another, I think, piece of information suggesting that it's realistic to think that aerosol is a source of contamination. So this is Barbara Brito in 2014. So what she did is that she took 4 sow herds in the Midwest, and she installed air collectors around these barns. So they were placed 30 meters from the barns in the prevailing wind direction. This was done between October and December 2012. The samples were taken between 7 and 7:30 in the morning. They took 51 to 59 samples per sow herd. What they found was that 29 to 42% of these samples were positive, number one, and they found 8 to 14 different strains of virus around each of these barns. They also had a control farm that was an empty farm located at least 15 kilometers from the closest pigs, and this farm had no positive samples. However, you know, I have given you quite a bit of information, I think, suggesting that aerosol transmission is important and frequent and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it is still not totally accepted. So Arruda, Dr. Arruda, as well as 7 other scientists, said this about, let's say, aerosol 4 years ago. Further studies are required to better understand whether airborne transmission is a frequent event and under what condition this occurs. Considering the peer-reviewed publications summarized herein, one can conclude that airborne transmission of PRRS virus is possible, but the probability over long distances, my pointer doesn't work all the time, the probability over long distances appear to be relatively low. And then this year, another group of researchers said, we agree with previous conclusions, and the conclusions were those of Arruda et al., that airborne transmission is an infrequent event or unlikely event. And then there's another recent paper that states this: within the context, parameters, and assumptions used in the case study, we concluded that a farm with an ongoing outbreak would pose a non-zero risk of infecting a susceptible herd up to 25 kilometers if the infected animals shed the virus for 14 days. So, where do I stand in 2023? I think the same. Aerosol transmission is frequent and can occur over significant distances. In 5-10 years from now, we'll see who's right and who's wrong. Of course, I will be right, but I'll stay humble with that. Okay, sow vaccination. It's not easy to make a comparison between, let's say, farms that are vaccinating sows and farms that are not vaccinating sows, because quite frequently they have different genetics, and some genetics may be more susceptible than others. They have different management, different strains, and quite often they don't use the same control program if they become infected. And we do know that vaccinated sow herds can break and sometimes have significant, serious losses. We know that. However, on average, if you do have an outbreak, positive sow herds vaccinated and or already infected with the field strain will have less losses, return to previous production faster, and produce negative pigs faster than if you have a naive herd, a herd that is totally negative. And we have several studies that have shown that. So I like this because this is within the same company. So this is the mash-off system, 150,000 sows in the US, and this is recent data. This was published last year. And we can have a meaningful comparison here because it's the same system, the same genetics, the same management. So they looked at the 125 PRRS outbreaks between 2012 and 2020. And then so we can have a comparison between vaccinated and unvaccinated farms within the same system. So one of the conclusions was, overall, the Fahrenhouse metrics continue to reinforce that vaccination as a management strategy positively improved production outcomes relative to piglets produced. Well, that's good. For me, that's strong. But what is even stronger is this, because this is almost the perfect situation to make a comparison. So this is Barbara Brito in 2014. She looked at 16 farms that broke. 6 of these farms were vaccinated 3 times a year. The gilts were vaccinated twice before introduction, and she compared the results to 10 naive farms, so farms that did not have any person there, totally naive, not vaccinated. Here we have the same company, the same genetics, the same management, the same strain, which is quite rare, the same area and the same period. All of these farms broke within 10 weeks from one another. On top of that, all of the 16 farms use exactly the same control program, which was once the farm became infected, they loaded the farm with gilts, they closed the farm, they vaccinated twice, 28 days apart. The losses in the vaccinated farm, 1.15 piglets per sow. So if you have 1,000 sows on the farm, they lost 1,150 piglets. In the non-vaccinated farm, in the naive farms, it was 3 times higher. This, for me, so far, is I would say, the most significant comparison that I've seen. Okay, growing pig vaccination. First, we'll look at results that have been obtained experimentally. So to validate the efficacy of a vaccine, in most cases, what we do is that we take naive pigs, we vaccinate some, we don't vaccinate others, and then we challenge these pigs with a given strain of the virus. There are a multitude of PRRS strains that are circulating, let's say, in our herds. And these strains, on top of that, change rapidly. So if I introduce a strain today in my farm and I don't change anything, a year later, if it is still circulating, this strain has already changed quite a bit. So yeah, the idea is to try to see what's happening when you challenge a vaccine with different strains. So as you will see, sometimes the results are really good, sometimes it can be disappointing. Okay, I chose Engelvac PRRS MLV because it's the vaccine that has been on the market for the longest period of time. It's the vaccine that has been studied the most. It's the vaccine for which we have the highest number of challenge strains that have been tested against, and it's a vaccine that has 97% market share in Canada. So I think it's relevant to discuss that particular vaccine. So what's happening here? So this is one trial, so strain number 1, if you want. These are the pigs that were vaccinated, and these are the pigs that were not vaccinated. As you can see, the pigs that were vaccinated had only 1% of lung lesions. The pigs that were not vaccinated had 31.6 times more lung lesions. My favorite is this one, strain number 4. The pigs vaccinated at 0.3% lung lesions. The non-vaccinated pigs at 37.7. This is 125 times higher lung lesions than the vaccinated pigs. However, look at strain number 10. For this particular strain, the vaccinated animals had 29.8% lung lesions. The controls at 36%. So there's not a big difference there. That would be considered as disappointing, if you want. So this means that the vaccines normally are going to be good against a lot of strains, not necessarily all of the strains. So this was in 2014. The company, when a new strain appears on the, let's say, in the field, they try to use that strain to verify if the vaccine is protecting or not against that strain. So this is what they did in 2017 against this particular strain, strain 174. So the average daily gain for Engelvac per ml was 0.61. It was 0.24 for the controls, and lung lesions were also much smaller. And then this is another strain, strain 134, that was tested against the vaccine. And this is a hell of a challenge, because look at what happened in the animals that were not vaccinated. So the controls in this particular trial, they actually lost weight. They did not gain weight after the challenge, they lost weight. And the lung lesions were at 58, and they actually had a 61.1% mortality rate. The pigs that were vaccinated with Engelvac per ml, they did gain weight. There was a high mortality. 15% is not great, but it's 4 times lower than that. Okay, these were experimental results. Let's look at some field situations now. So, first of all, testimonials from 2 very credible people. Paul Yeski is a very credible veterinarian working in the US. So he said last year at the AASV meeting, vaccination continues to be a very useful tool in the wean to finish population, and today even more widely adopted. And Clayton Johnson, another very credible veterinarian working in the US, said last month, he said, no vaccine alone moved mortality from 20 to 1%, but per MLV vaccine can often reduce mortality 5 to 10%, which is pretty good. So he said, study after study demonstrate protection against across circulating isolates through increased average daily gain and decreased lung lesion. But as I said, there are some strains for which it may not be as good. So this is something that I did report years ago. We have a 6,000 sow negative herd. The herd is sending piglets to the nursery. The piglets are remaining negative in the nursery. Unfortunately, the finishing site became infected with PRRS. So the owners decided that the population was too costly, so they wanted to try vaccination. So they vaccinated the piglets 2 weeks before arrival to the finishing site. And these are the results that were obtained. So we had 17 batches of pigs before vaccination, and we had 4 batches of pigs after vaccination. And as you can see, the mortality rate, the gain, the feed efficiency, everything is in much favor. It is very much in favor of the vaccine. And this is a much smaller herd. It's a 125 farrow to finish operation. The mortality at one point in time was at 21.3%. In the nursery. So they began to vaccinate here in February 2006, and the mortality dropped quite a bit. Timing of vaccination. So basically, ideally, what you want is to have at least 3 to 4 weeks before the time the pigs will come in contact with the virus, the field virus. So if you vaccinate today, it's because you think that the pigs will not come in contact with the field virus in less than 3 or 4 weeks. This is ideally. Unfortunately, we have something that is bothering, and it's maternal immunity. So if the pigs come in, are vaccinated with the PRRS vaccine at a time when they have quite a bit of maternal immunity, this can interfere. It doesn't mean it will. It can interfere with the efficacy of the vaccine. Because if I vaccinate naive pigs, close to 100% will seroconvert. If I vaccinate pigs with maternal immunity, then it can be much lower. So here's an example. So these are naive pigs that were vaccinated on day 0. So 0.00, they have no antibodies at all. While the pigs that Yeah. The pigs, 28 days later after vaccination, you can see to be positive, you need to be at 0.4 or more. So all of these pigs are positive. So this means that they do have antibodies against the PRRS virus. However, if you look at pigs that did have maternal immunity at the time of vaccination, so the only pigs that actually increased their antibody titers are those that were really low at the time of vaccination. All of the other ones, as you can see, their titer is actually dropping afterwards. So there can be some maternal immunity interference. This being said, we do have reports of successful vaccination at all of these ages. Day 1 processing, 7 days, 14 days around weaning time. Most of the time, I would say that pigs are vaccinated around 3-4 weeks of age, but it's a case-by-case definition. You need to sit with your vet and say, okay, here's my situation, what should I do, what would be best? And keep in mind that it's not always beneficial. There are situations where you try just about any vaccination program and it's not working. So there are situations like that. 1 or 2 doses of vaccine. 1997, I reported that. I was not working for Boehringer at the time. At the time, I was at North Carolina State University, so I had no contact whatsoever with Boehringer. So here's what I did. We had 5 sow herds that were individually coupled with 5 nursery sites. So this means that each nursery site had piglets from only one source. The mortality rates in these nurseries were between 5.4 and 17.4%. Multiple strategies had been tried without success, including half a dose of vaccine at 7 days in 2 of the herds. So when I got there, I asked the guys, I said, make me a list of everything that you have tried so far. So they gave me the list, and it was all, horrific. They had tried just about everything. So I said, we will try vaccination again, but we will use a more aggressive program. So the program that we used was full dose at processing and half a dose at 10 days or at weaning. So these are the results before and after. And actually, this was absolutely amazing, particularly this one here. 17.4% mortality rate in the nursery before vaccination, it dropped to 1.4. So overall, these 5 farms went from 11.1 to 2.4%. When I saw that, I thought, this is the recipe. I just found what needs to be done. Unfortunately, even this aggressive program is not working everywhere. This is experimentally. This has never been published, and honestly, I don't know why they have not published it. But we have 2 groups of pigs. One is vaccinated at weaning and challenged 8 weeks post-weaning. The other one is vaccinated at weaning and 4 weeks later and challenged 8 weeks post-weaning. To make a long story short, the pigs that were vaccinated twice were 7 pounds heavier 119 days later. 7 pounds is a lot of weight. This is something that is quite recent. Dr. Mura, he took pigs from an unstable herd. So pigs were infected at weaning, and they tried 2 vaccination programs, processing or weaning, so only 1 dose, or processing or weaning plus 4 weeks later. And basically, the pigs that were vaccinated twice had about 5% less mortality. This is something that was published last year. 6,000 sow herd vaccinated 3 times a year. So the sows are vaccinated 3 times a year, and they tried different vaccination programs for the piglets to improve nursery mortality. So 1 full dose, 1 to 3 days before weaning for a period of 15 weeks had 4.3% mortality. 1 full dose at 10 days of age for a period of 21 weeks had 4.5% mortality. And 2 half dose 10 days plus pre-weaning for 21 weeks, the mortality was the best, 1.8%, highly significant. And the last one that I will show, this is something that has just been published. They took a positive unstable sow herd with a low prevalence. Piglets were vaccinated either 1 dose at weaning or 2 dose, weaning plus 21 days later. This was a wean to finish operation. The performance, the mortality was almost nil, so it did not have a big impact on mortality. But the fact is that the 2-dose program had the faster increase in antibody ELISA positive pigs. The neutralizing antibody titers were stronger and lasted longer, and there was less virus in the pigs at 43 days. So all of this is suggesting that there may be situations where a 2-dose program or a 2 half-dose program may be better. Shedding reduction. So what Dr. D did in 2014, he took two groups of pigs, about 1,000 pigs. One was vaccinated and the other one was not vaccinated. So they challenged these pigs 28 days post-vaccination, and then they tried to see how long and for how many times they would identify the virus in air samples. So the pigs that were vaccinated, only 4 times they could identify the virus, the field strain in the air. The pigs that were not vaccinated, it was 21 times. The duration of positive air samples, the pigs that had been vaccinated, they were able to find the virus, the field strain, only 6 days after, 6 days after the challenge. And the unvaccinated pigs, it was 36 days. So what this means is that if the pigs are vaccinated and are coming in contact with the field strain, they will shed the virus for a shorter period of time and they will shed less, which means that the neighbors are less likely to be, let's say, infected. Mixing vaccines. Everybody wants to mix vaccine because it's convenient. You prefer to give 1 injection rather than to give the pig 3 injections. The most popular, I would say, mix is PRRS plus PCV2 plus Mycoplasma pneumonia for convenience reason, of course. However, when you mix a modified live vaccine like PRRS with killed vaccines, you can have an impact on the livability of this vaccine. So here, what it shows is that the blue line is Engelvac PRRS MLV that has not been mixed with anything. So the fact that the bar remains horizontal, it means that the power of the vaccine has not been diminished. The second line, the red line, is Engelvac 3 Flex. So this contains Circoflex, Mycoflex plus Engelvac PRRS MLV. As you can see, there is a drop in the number, in the power, if you want, the livability of the PRRS vaccine over time. So 2 hours after the vaccine has been mixed, there is a little drop, but there is a bigger drop with the other vaccine. So this is Fostera and this is Circumvent. So these vaccines mixed with Engelvac PRRS MLV, the PRRS vaccine will reduce its livability. So Engelvac 3 Flex is a quite interesting product because of a few reasons. Like Engelvac PRRS MLV, as I said, is the most studied PRRS vaccine, the one on which we have the most data, and it has 97% market share, 96.9% to be accurate, in the last evaluation. So it's, I would say, a vaccine that is very popular. Engelvac Circoflex is the most successful animal health vaccine of all times. This is a big sentence. The most successful animal health vaccine of all time. So which means that whether we're talking about poultry, cattle, horses, dogs, cats, swine, no vaccine has had as much success in terms of, let's say, sales, in terms of dollar sales, than this vaccine. And Engelvac Mycoflex is a Mycoplasma pneumonia vaccine. The efficacy of that combination has been confirmed in, let's say, a PRRS challenge. Engelvac 3 Flex pigs were at 4.5% lung lesions. The controls are at 32.9%. So this is a vaccine that is very popular and it's increasing in popularity. So I assigned the value of 1 to the 2019 sales of that vaccine. And as you can see, every year it's climbing. So in conclusion, location, distance to infected pigs is important. Air filtration works. Incomplete is better than, is not as good as complete protection, but there's a cost. Sow vaccination will usually reduce losses of infection, meaning, yes, the losses will be reduced. They're not going to be totally eliminated, for sure. Pig vaccination can reduce losses and also shedding, so that you can protect your neighbors as well. Engelvac 3 Flex is convenient and efficacious. And as far as PRRS vaccination is concerned, and as far as PRRS actually as a whole is concerned, we need to have realistic expectations. The vaccine is a tool, one of the tools that you can use to help yourself. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Much appreciated. Question on the Mark Chambers with PAC Sunterra, complicated individual. Anyway, when on the groups that you were vaccinating in the nursery and then on to finishing to protect them from breaks in the finishing, were you vaccinating all those pigs or just a percentage of them? And was it full dose or
yeah,
fractionated?
if I understood the question well, is that if you vaccinate the pigs, let's say you have 1,000 pigs, theoretically to be vaccinated, do we vaccinate the 1,000 pigs or we vaccinate just a fraction of them? That's the question? Yeah. We really don't encourage to vaccinate only a fraction of the pigs. When you vaccinate, if you're going to do something, and I don't encourage you to do that, but if you're going to do something because you want to save on cost, you can consider, reducing the dosage a little bit. But if you do that, keep in mind that it's not necessarily going to be as good as if you use a full dose. But we don't think that's, and I know we've had this discussion within the Southwest group, but I don't think that personally this is something that you should do, because if you vaccinate only half of the pigs, okay, so this means that you have 500 pigs that are vaccinated and 5 that are not vaccinated. So the 500 pigs will shed something that is already a little bit different than what is in the bottle of the vaccine. And this is something that we try not to do. If you're going to vaccinate, you should not keep a portion of the pigs unvaccinated. Is it going to make a difference in many cases? Not necessarily, but this is a vaccine that will change over time. So in other words, I put my vaccine in that pig today. If I check that pig 2 months from now, the vaccine will already have changed a bit. And just to tell you, to give you an idea, a field strain of PRRS or even a vaccine strain does not necessarily have to change a lot for it to be different, to have a different virulence. And the best example that I've seen so far, it's a paper that dates back to 3 years ago. And what they did is that they took a strain of PRRS in a herd that had no problem and a strain of PRRS in a herd that had significant problems. And they compared these two strains, and the strains were 99.45% homologous on the whole genome. So what this means is that you don't necessarily need to have a big change in your strain or in your vaccine to make it less or more virulent. So I don't think that this is the right approach, to answer your question.